and welcome back to Love Your Food. This week, with temperatures coming down, we have this amazing and delicious, rich beef and beet stew. So this is, we had some beautiful fresh Ontario beets. It's the end of the summer season, so we're getting some of those great root vegetables right now. And we're going to make this beautiful, delicious stew. And let's get going with our ingredients. So we're using beef short ribs for this. Any kind of stew meat's fine. Some garlic. A stick of celery, some green onions, that's mostly for garnish, these beautiful Ontario beets, some fresh thyme, a bay leaf, we have some fresh dill, a carrot, an onion, we're going to be using some chicken broth, beef broth is also fine for this, and we're going to be using a little bit of red wine as well, so we have this nice Malbec, whatever you have on hand that's nice to drink with as well. So we're going to start by getting our mirepoix ready. So this is our combination of the celery, carrots, and onion. We're just going to get that going first. So we don't want this to be super, super small. We do want some texture in this. So Chef Caleb here is going to be chopping sort of the traditional soup cut of, of celery. And you want it, you know, a little bit thick. You want it not to completely disappear in your soup. And that's about as far as we're going to go for that. Following that, we are going to peel the carrot. If your carrot is very, very clean, it is possible to do it without peeling it, but we prefer to peel it for this sort of stewing. So we're just going to make sure that that's peeled all the way. And again, we're going to cut this not super, super small. We're going to cut it into quarters and then pretty decently chunky slices of those. Just to have a little bit of texture when it's done cooking. And it's okay if they're not all exactly the same size. This is going to cook for a long, long time, so it's all going to get cooked. Don't worry. For the garlic, we're just going to peel it and cut it into slightly smaller pieces, just so that it has a little bit more surface area to circulate through the soup. And if your garlic cloves are very, very small, then you can just leave them whole. For the onion, we're just going to do a quick dice on this. You can just do a what they generally refer to as a French cut, but not all the way through. Leave it attached on the root end, and we're going to just cut that. We're only using half of the onion on this one. And there you go. So that is our mirepoix for our start. We're going to use just a plain neutral oil in there and get everything going. So in goes the celery, carrots, onion, and garlic just to get started while we start working on some other things. We're also going to toss in a couple of sprigs of the thyme, not all of it. Some of it is going to go in now, and the bay leaf, just to sort of wake it up a little bit. Add their flavors to the soup. We're going to be pulling out those sprigs of thyme later. You don't want sticks in your soup. And of course the bay leaf comes out before serving as well. And we're just going to add a little bit of salt and let that start cooking. We're going to cover that and let it start to simmer. Just to start sweating out those veggies, just to give them a little head start over some of the others. So next step is going to be our beets. So we're going to cut off the stems and roots. And this is the part of the cooking process that looks a little bit like a crime scene, but we're going to start peeling these as well. Easiest way to do that is honestly by going around. So you want a good, nice, sharp vegetable peeler. And then when you're done, you want to just make sure that there's no little bits of skin or anything on there. And once your beets are all nicely peeled, we are going to slice them in pretty big pieces. Again, this is something that we want to show up at the end of the soup. Once it's been stewed, the beets do tend to lose a lot of their color, which goes into the broth or in the stew, which is fine. But it's a really great texture. They're quite fibrous, and after cooking for a long time, they become quite sweet. So it's nice to have sort of a big chunk to really taste the beet in your stew. So this has been just sweating for a little while, so you can see it's just starting to, some of the onions are just starting to become translucent. The carrot is starting to get a little soft in there. It's just starting to sweat. So now's a great time. We're going to add our beets. And we're just going to cover that again and let that cook for a little while as well. Basically, we're just steaming everything in there. So next thing is we're going to start preparing our beef. So like I said, we have beef short ribs. You can use any kind of stewing meat for this. We had these short ribs on hand, so we're just going to go ahead with these. If they're a little uneven, again, this is going to cook for a long time, and they will cook all the way through. So we're just going to start off by getting a really good sear on here for all that amazing flavor, that Maillard reaction, as the sear the sear really gets that nice browning on the meat. So we've got our smoking hot cast iron pan, and we're just going to get our beef on here. We're just going to get a nice brown coating on basically all the sides that we can. Really, with cast iron, you get it smoking hot like this, and it's okay. You can crowd that pan. It's not going to really affect the cooking temperature. And if you have to do it in stages, do it in stages. We had to do this in about 3 stages to get all of our short ribs done. So once the first side is down, you want to give a little bit of salt to the other side. Every side that is going to touch that cast iron, you do want to give it some seasoning. We're letting that cook, and once the first side is nice and dark, we are going to flip that over. See that beautiful color on there, lots of flavor in that browning. We just love it. And you can also see some of the fat rendering out into the pan, which is great. It's just sort of self-lubricating, making sure it's not going to stick to your cast iron. And we're going to do a little bit on some of the sides too. So, you know, you can take that out with your tongs, give it a little bit of salt, and put that side down. The more sides that you hit with the sear, that beautiful browning, the more flavor you're going to have. It's all about flavor. So once it's all done, you've got all that beautiful flavor. We're going to pour off all of the fat that came off there. We don't want any of that fat, that's that beef tallow, but we do want to deglaze that cast iron and get some of those beautiful little crispy bits, the little fond from the bottom of the cast iron. So we're going to pour in a little bit of our chicken broth. Again, we're using the low sodium chicken broth because we want to season this ourselves, and just give it a little scrape with our wooden spoon to make sure some of those beautiful little crispy bits of beef come up. Try not to slosh it everywhere. And from here, we're just going to add the rest of our chicken broth. If you find that the chicken broth is not quite enough, you can add some water. You can also use water for the whole thing, but we prefer to use something that has a little bit of flavor, so we use chicken broth. Again, beef broth is just fine for this, or even vegetable broth. You can use a mushroom broth or something like that. Works just fine. So we're going to top that off with a little bit of water. Also helps to get the last of the chicken broth out of your container if you use the same container for the water. And then from there, we're going to top it off with just a little bit of that red wine. We're not going to use all of it. We just want to use it as a flavor. And we're going to probably drink the rest of it with the meal. So we're just going to give that a little stir, make sure that everything's not sticking to the bottom, and everything's good to go. Really, this is exactly the amount of liquid we want. Everything just barely covered. A few things just right at the surface, but nothing really sticking out. That's perfect. So we're going to cover that up again, and that's going to cook for a while. So you can see here, everything is starting to cook. The beets are actually already losing some of their color. And that broth is becoming really, really rich. Now is a great time. We're going to toss in a little bit of pot barley. Pot barley, pearl barley, roughly the same thing. I think it's the main difference is how much they've been polished, so it's a slightly different look, but they're the same. So there we go. We're going to cover that again. Leave it open a little bit. We do want some of that concentration of flavor, so we're going to let it reduce a little bit as well. Now, you do want to try and skim some of the fat because we used a pretty fatty cut. We used those beautiful short ribs. We do want to skim some of the fat, and there will be some scum coming to the top as well. Some of that is just protein, some things like bone marrow in the case of the short ribs. So just skim some of that off the top. If you see those little oil slicks and you see the sort of rafts of just like protein on top, you want to take that out. So from here we're going to sort of just get the finishing touches ready. Here's the rest of our thyme. We're going to take that off the stems. And we're just going to give it a little chop. So we don't want it to be, again, you don't want any large chunks. You don't want sticks or anything in your stew. So you just want to make sure that it's all pretty small. This is thyme is a really classic flavor for this kind of dish. And we're going to toss that in now pretty close to the end of the cooking process. Give everything a stir once again. And then while that's finishing up, we are going to make a sour cream for this. So here is our dill. And we're just going to take the stems off of the dill. And again, we're just going to give that a little chop to make it a bit finer. So there's our dill ready. We're going to add that to a bowl, and we are going to add a little bit of sour cream to this. So similar as you might serve with like a borscht, we're going to have a sour cream to go on top of our beef and beet stew. And we're going to just mix that in with the dill. And it just really brightens up the flavor. So you've got that nice tangy sour cream and that beautiful dill flavor as well. And that's just going to make a really nice accompaniment to our beef and beet stew. And then for a little bit of garnish, we're going to get some green onions. So we're going to cut off the roots and a little bit at the top to get rid of just the dry bits at the end. All of the amounts are going to be in the description below. And then we're just going to cut this pretty fine, honestly. We want just a small garnish of green onions, some of the greens and some of the whites. That's about as big as we want it. That's just about right. And then plating. So really, you sort of want to assemble a plate. You want to get a little bit of the broth in there. You want to get some chunks of veggies. Make sure that you've got a good combination of everything in there. And then for each guest, you want to give one or two of those beautiful, beautiful seared pieces of beef. Depending on the appetites, of course. And give that a little topping with some of that sour cream. A little dash with the green onions, and we are ready to go. You can see also in the background we are actually browning a little bit of oyster mushroom as well, which makes a beautiful garnish for this. And that's it. So this is our beef and beet stew. Absolutely delicious. Really quite simple. Does take a little bit of time to cook, but totally worth it. just delicious, especially with temperatures coming down. We're getting into soup and stew season for sure. So if you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.